Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. A very warm welcome to Meet Menaca, episode 86. Today, we are going to be discussing art of learning to appreciate solitude with Sobhana Jaya Madhavan. She is a AVP, Simon Fraser University, Chief Impact Officer, #Code, and a president in Busy India Business Network. Meet Menaca is a 90-minute talk show with a mission to encourage, educate, and empower you. Please support us by subscribing to the YouTube channel to share these messages to benefit as many people as possible across the globe. It is a free show, and we usually put the links on all social medias so you can register, or please drop us an email at meet@menaca.co and we'll send you the link. So thank you so much for all the support and love so far. Now, it's a pleasure and honor to introduce Sobhana. We were co-speakers now 3 years back in India, and within that time, we have really become good friends. It's not only as a co-speaker, now I'm introducing her as my friend as well. A very warm welcome to you, Sobhana.
Thank you, Menaca. Thrilled to be here and good to be back on your show.
Thank you. A little about the speaker today. Sobhana graduated from Calicut University with a bachelor's degree in philosophy and from Tata Institute of Social Sciences. With a master's degree in social work, after working in Southeast Asia, she immigrated to Canada in 1995 and worked with the government of British Columbia for nearly 2 decades. After a 2-year stint in India as head of HR, she joined Simon Fraser University as Associate Vice President, External Relations in 2017. Sobhana is very community engaged and sits on several advisory committees and boards and dedicates time for pro bono work in Canada and India. In 2019, she was recognized by the Global Women Economic Forum with a Woman of the Decade Award, and in June 2022, will receive an International Inclusion Champion Award from the National Federation of Blind in India. Sobhana is the mother of 2 sons, Prabhanj and Niranj. She currently lives in Vancouver, Canada, and is passionate about peace in all spheres of life. A very warm welcome to you again, Sobhana, and lots of love for people who come and support us week after week too. Without further ado, let's start discussing the important topic of solitude. Solitude is a word which is become a bit more familiar to people, mainly after COVID. Of course, people like us who are in the personal development field, we have been talking about it much further. And of course, years and decades and hundreds of years back, particularly from South Asian culture, a lot of people did speak about these things, but we kind of got a bit lost. And I think we have reinvented ourselves now. So when we hear solitude, what comes to mind when we hear the word, and why? It is something for all of us to think about, but first I'm going to ask that question to Sobhana.
Thank you so much, Menaca, and as always, such a warm welcome on your show. And like you, I'm very proud of you and what you've accomplished, and the fact that you've taken so much effort to bring a global community together, to talk, to educate, and to empower. And that's just incredible. And congratulations to you and your team.
Well, thank you so much.
So solitude, of course, I think you and I, we've chatted about things like this many times before, topics like this, and sure, it's near and dear to my heart. And I think over the years, what I've realized is that, like millions of people around the world, I probably misunderstood that solitude is just, another word for loneliness. But actually, they are not. The words solitude and loneliness mean very different things. And solitude is not about a want for something because you lack something. So loneliness is all about wanting something because you lack something. So it's either lacking a partner, lacking company, lacking friends, or lacking family. So it's more about not having something and then feeling sad about it, feeling negative about it, and therefore now wanting it. So if I'm lonely and I lack, say, a friend or a partner, then I want it. And when I don't get it, then I feel sad about it. So that's loneliness. And that has become a pandemic, especially during the pandemic. But solitude is actually about wanting to go into a space and wanting to have time to be alone, because one feels that it's in that aloneness that one can truly be free. And many philosophers, have said, for instance, that you cannot be free and you cannot love freedom unless you love solitude and you have solitude. So then going back to your question, so what does solitude mean? For me personally, solitude means being free.
Sure, thank you so much. And we often get confused between being alone and feeling lonely, isn't it? I will put that on my YouTube channel because I did a very short speech once. Are you feeling lonely? Are you alone? Because they're very two different things. Like you, I myself got very confused. If you ask me more than a decade back, I hardly knew the difference because we are somehow conditioned to think if you're alone, you feel lonely. But there are a lot of times you are not alone, you feel lonely. But there are other times you are alone, but you don't feel lonely. Am I right, Shobhana?
Yes, absolutely. So when you're lonely, you perhaps are alone. And when you're experiencing solitude, you're definitely alone. But the difference is how you feel within you and how you perceive that aloneness. So if I want to experience solitude, which I absolutely crave for every single day, and I make the time and the space to experience it, I am alone. But it's being alone by choice and being alone because it's in that space of being alone and only there that I can truly be myself and I can truly feel free, which is very important to me. So there's a fundamental difference. So people misunderstand if someone says, oh, I'm single or I live by myself. They're like, oh, poor you. That must be really difficult. Well, not really. There are a lot of people, millions of people around the world who choose to be single or, who are single because they've lost a partner or, they don't have a partner at this point in time. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're lonely or unhappy, right? It just means that they're alone. And that could be a very good thing for them.
Of course, I think a lot of people choose to be alone, isn't it?
And more, I think, our generation and the generation that's, following us, a lot of people choose to be single. They choose to live alone, even when they have the option of living with someone or being part of a joint family or living in a co-op with a community. They choose to be, alone. I mean, I'm sure in London, just as in Vancouver, you have individuals in the 80s and 90s who refuse to go to a senior's, retirement home or go live with their children because they actually are fiercely independent. And when you're fiercely independent, you choose to be alone often, or because you crave for solitude, so there are millions of people around the world who choose not to be in a relationship or choose not to get married or remarried because that solitude means so much to them.
It's too valuable to lose it, correct? And also, I think solitude is something you choose voluntarily, even if you're in a relationship. It's about carving out that time, isn't it, to be with yourself. We will definitely go into details later. I'm sure we will dive deeply into it and see the benefits of it. But like you said, main message, I guess, this stage is for people to understand being alone is not a loss. And solitude is actually a bliss, isn't it, Shobhana? That's what it is.
Absolutely. And, everything that we feel and we experience, has a linkage to a perception of it. Right. So I just want to throw another thing out there, which is, there is often a misunderstanding that when people are in relationships or when people are with people, they're not alone. Right. Well, physically, you're not alone, but you could be in a room with 20 people and be terribly lonely. Right. You could be in a marriage and you could be terribly lonely. Right. Because feeling that you have someone in your life or to not feel alone has got to do more with physicality. It has less to do with physicality and more to do with how we feel inside ourselves. And that's why solitude becomes such an interesting pursuit, because it is about going deep and deep and deep within yourself to a place that feels like no other. And unless you have been taught about it, or you know someone who's done it and talks about it, or you read about it, you don't consciously crave for it and go after it, because you just don't know how good that state of solitude is and can be.
I agree totally. Because I said before, personal development era of mine, two things. I used to be surrounded by people and I loved it, absolutely loved it. And my dad, even today, he does a lot of yoga and meditation. Now he can't do yoga as much, but he does meditation for sure. I'm that person who used to think, what a waste of time. They can be doing so much more. Because particularly as professionals, or if you work in healthcare or corporate, you are told many times, being productive is being busy. Like doing nothing is you're really undermining your career, undermining your growth. So that's what I used to think as well. But like you said, unless until you experience it, it is hard to understand how beneficial it is. So that's the reason we have chosen this subject, because firstly, after COVID, this has become a much more important topic for people to address. Many people have spoken about it and talked to us even in get-togethers or on the phone calls. They always tell they feel lonely, and it is very difficult for you to explain it. And I'm sure you would explain it so much better than I would. I'm positive about it. Sobhana, during our conversations, you have always shared with me that you love solitude. I have come to love solitude now, but I wasn't, as I mentioned, I wasn't always that way. Has that always been that case with you?
Not at all. Not at all. I actually was very scared of solitude. It's over the years that I have realized how valuable it is for one to be well in life, and how wellness and mindfulness and solitude are all very interconnected. And, I think it's because, like you said, when you grow up, you're socialized in a certain way, you grow up with a certain narrative, right? And certain things are not necessarily brought to the forefront of your attention. So, for example, if you saw a child, in any culture for that matter, you saw a child just sitting extremely quietly and intensely in a corner, doing something, you probably might think, oh, poor child, just all by himself or herself, right? Not realizing that they are actually in a state of solitude, enjoying whether it's the painting that they're doing or listening to the music or reading a book. And that's something you want to actually encourage them to do more of. The other thing is that over the last couple of decades, I would say especially the last decade, and I think technology has played a huge part, right? I mean, people literally, right, are married, to their phones these days, right? Or to their technology. I mean, people carry it everywhere. There are a lot of people who may not carry their child, but who carry their cell phone literally 24/7, right? So people have become very hyper connected, and it's a very hyper stimulated environment that we live in. And a byproduct of that is hyperactivity, right? When you're stimulated, then you're active, right? So in a hyper stimulated, hyper connected world of ours, it's quite understandable why people are so hyperactive, and why hyperactivity is such an issue, especially among young children, to the point that they have to be medicated, or society feels that they need to be medicated so that they just slow down and they quieten, right? In my case, I was actually a very introverted child growing up. I was quite shy, very quiet. It was only sort of in my teen years that I started to emerge more into an extroverted personality. And then by the time I hit, college and university, I was just unapologetic extrovert. And actually, I was never someone who craved for solitude or pursued it in a very conscious way. it was actually in the last couple of years that I started to realize that the few people in my life that have been very impactful or very influential or who I looked up to, including my mother, practiced a lot of meditation or yoga or very deliberate activities, which provided them an opportunity to experience solitude. And the benefits of it was very clear to me. So when I look at many of my bosses and mentors who were very, very calm, collected, never, lost control, even in a crisis situation, one thing they all had in common was that they actually loved solitude. And then I have a few musicians in my life who I greatly admire or care for or respect, and including my youngest son, Niranj, who is a musician. And what I've seen is that they can go hours into a world of solitude and disconnect, from people and what's around them. And what comes out of it is immense creativity. And that beautiful creativity and the byproducts of creativity is rooted by their ability to go into a place of stillness. Because unless you have stillness, you don't have clarity. And unless you have clarity, you cannot come up with not just clear thoughts, but also clear ideas that then, when executed, becomes pieces of poetry or music or literature or whatever art form that all of us in society appreciate.
Thank you, Shona. It definitely brings in a lot of insight for me as well. My grandmother, I lovingly call her mommy, and most of the things are always dedicated to her because I was very, very close to her. Whenever she gets time, she would either bake something or she would sit with the dictionary and she would go through that and she would read magazines. She was definitely not one of those people craving to speak to a lot of people, though she was very loving and caring towards us. And she would always want to tell stories to us. There was always something meaningful in her conversations, even when she conversed. And as I mentioned, my dad is the same thing. Looking back on it, like you, most of the people who were very impactful in my life, and including my mentors, coaches, even very close friends, for whatever reason, I have a set of friends who are these networking queens who are always surrounded by people and they thrive on that. And then I have another set of friends, almost equal numbers. They are total introverts. They want to read and talk about serious things and knowledge. My mom is a social butterfly. So when I grew up, I always thought I was the extrovert. Like you, I thought, I guess in a way I was shaped into being an extrovert. And then I have gone through stages. When I migrated to India, then I went through a phase of being totally almost like an introvert at least for a year. But that's the time I started writing a lot. I wrote a lot of poetry. I wish I kept it, didn't. But then again, after so many years later, only when I went through that phase of solitude, then I started writing my book. To be creative, I think we definitely need solitude. That's my theory anyway. I think because unless until you pause, take a step back, and take some time out for you, it's almost impossible to become curious about yourself, about things, about other people, be creative, and even problem solving skills. How many times, I'm sure we all have experienced it, right? We will be focusing on one thing, breaking our head, and nothing happens. And then for a few minutes, we go for a walk or take a wash. It's always the case, isn't it? Suddenly, a light bulb moment goes, a eureka moment comes, and there is the solution for that. We could do that. So I think we definitely underestimate the advantage of solitude. Like you said, like you, it has come a bit later in my life with the realization.
Yeah, because I think, as a society, right, we often misunderstand busyness with productivity. Just because I'm busy doesn't mean I'm productive. It just means I'm busy. The same is with noise, and silence. Now, people always misunderstand, a lot of people misunderstand that talking and hearing someone's voice is the only way someone communicates. Well, you can communicate a lot by being silent. And you often probably add more to a conversation by being an active listener and by being silent, right? And this is one of the lessons I learned way later in life, is that you have actually so much to learn, and that learning happens because you choose to pause that talking or babbling about something, or making a ton of noise, or running helter-skelter, looking very busy. It's when you go to a state of being quiet and reflective, that's where you not only learn so much, but you see and hear things that you otherwise might miss. And that's why behavioral scientists, or people with a background like mine in social work, we pay so much attention to body language, right? Because body language, which is a silent means of communication, says a lot more than what people do with their, hands or legs, or their face. So the silence, which is a strong means of communication, is loaded with meaning. And so solitude, which is all about being still, being quiet, and literally disconnecting everything from everything and everyone around you, so that you can go into this space, which is the only place where you can really be just you, and you can be with yourself, for yourself, right? That's actually where a lot of communication happens between you and your inner self, and you and the world. So an example would be, you go with 20 people on a hike. You have a great time. You notice the trees, you listen to the stream, you listen to the birds chirping, you see sunbeams, kind of floating through the leaves and the trees, and you have a beautiful experience. Now, if you go back on that hike just by yourself, you will have a completely different experience. You will notice things with so much deeper intensity. I had this very interesting experience just last week, Menaca, and I want to quickly share that. So you know what a mote is, M-O-T-E,
yeah.
Right? So motes are flying all around us, especially when sunbeams, come in through curtains or little, cracks, in our homes. Through the pathway of the sunbeam, you can see motes, little things floating around. Now, I've always enjoyed motes. I think they're just beautiful. There's something about motes that's always attracted me, because they're so small, they're so tiny, you almost can't see them. And then when you see them, they're just beautiful. They're just dancing around in this sunbeam, as if the sunbeam is their stage, and then they're performing on it. So as someone who loves poetry, to write poetry, I do have a wild imagination. So hence, some of the choice of words. But last week I was sitting having my favorite cup of tea in the morning, and I was just kind of turning my head, and the sunbeam and these motes caught my attention. I was really close to it, and I noticed something for the first time. I was delighted, I was shocked, and I can't stop thinking about it. Motes actually have a very distinct shape, almost like a snowflake, right? Like snowflakes that are so tiny and beautiful, they have a very distinct shape. So do the motes. Now, the only reason I saw it, I was able to appreciate it, I was able to go into that beautiful space, was because I was actually by myself listening to some Tibetan meditation music, and I was actually in a very Zen space. And because of that, I noticed something as tiny as a mote having a shape. Now, imagine now taking that into our daily lives, and imagine that each of us made the time to actually go after, appreciate, and experience solitude, whether it's 30 minutes of meditation in the morning, whether it's going for a walk in the forest, whether it's listening to a podcast, that is talking about something that takes you to a different place. Just imagine the clarity that we can have about everything within us and outside of us because of that practice. Like, one of the things I've admired about my mom all my life is that she always had a zenness to her. And I had the privilege of living with her from 2017 until a few months ago, before she returned back to Kerala in India. And one of the things that has struck me, which I did not appreciate when I was younger, but I do very much appreciate now, is the discipline to make the time, usually at the beginning of the day, and then sometimes end of the day, to be sort of in pursuit of a meditative state, whether it's by listening to, her meditative music, or whether it's walking, and soaking in the sunshine in the morning, whatever be the case, the daily practice of being with oneself really grounds you. And I've seen that in the case of my mother, in the case of my sons, in the case of some people who are significant in my life. I've seen how they get grounded and how they have this quality by which they are able to see more than what's obvious. They're able to hear more than what just words, convey. And there is this immense beauty, that's very hard to describe. And so for me, I'm far from the place where I can honestly say that, oh yes, I crave for solitude and I get it every single time. No, it's a journey. It's a journey of unlearning as you learn to seek solitude, learn to appreciate it. And then when you find it, whether it's for 5 seconds or it's for 5 hours, you just hold on to it because it's quite magical, and it transforms the quality of your life, I think, more than anything else.
I totally agree. I love to hear you speak anyway. You have this beautiful energy in you when you talk about something particularly what you're passionate about. I call myself an ambivert. It took me years to figure out. I do enjoy being with people, but I have realized it totally drains me if I'm surrounded by people all the time. I cannot do it. And most of my productivity comes through when I am in solitude. And the other thing I really realized is, even when I did the course on mindfulness, even like, for example, even right now, when we are on the show, when I switch off and not worrying about how I am going to conduct the rest of the show and just listen to you, what you're saying, and it brings pleasure. You enjoy that moment much more. And I understand you as a speaker so much more. And I understand what are the values in that and how the audience are going to benefit from that. So I think that state will only come when you have that freedom to pause and worry about nothing and just listen to you. And because I do the training in leadership and communication, I always say active listening, solitude is a must, right?
Absolutely.
Because in communication, people always listen to talk or respond, not to understand, isn't it? That is the major issue. I forgot whose quote is it. The biggest misunderstanding is thinking somebody has understood it.
So yes. True. I mean, and the other thing is, one of the things we've talked about is how busy our lives have got, right? And I think in my particular case, in the last few years, especially the last 5 years, and during the pandemic, what I ended up doing is actually volunteering a lot more than I did previously. So, my day job, let's say is 10 hours, 12 hours a day. My volunteer work, is about, 25 to anywhere from 40 to 50 hours a week that I volunteer for a number of organizations and causes, both here and in India. And one of the things that I realized is because I'm constantly with people, either talking or listening or collaborating whether it's virtually or in person. And my role at SFU is in external relations. So as AVP of External Relations, I get to go for a lot of meetings. I get to go for a lot of functions. I get to represent the university in a number of places. And then in my new role as president at BCIBN, BC India Business Network, it's all about networking. It's all about being with people, bringing people together, getting people to work towards a common goal, exchanging information, creating events, organizing events, leading events, which I love, which really, really feeds into that extroverted side of me. But as I've gotten busier and as I've taken on more and more in my professional life and in my pro bono life, right? What I've realized is that my crave for solitude has deepened. And so, for example, now every single day when I wake up, if I don't have few minutes, 15 to 30 minutes of stillness, and if I don't have that quiet time, it's very hard for me to be grounded where I'm actually productive and I'm happy during the rest of the day. Same thing I noticed that end of the day, if I don't take that 15, 20, 30 minutes to just unplug from everything, switch off the phones, and just go into this place of just listening to really beautiful, meditative music or reading something that is really deep and meaningful, then the quality of my sleep and how I feel when I wake up the next day is very different. So it's like anything else in life, you have a positive experience with something and it changes you in a good way, then you do it over and over again because you now know that this is how you're going to feel. But the other important thing is that, which I think is very critical, and one of the things that couples struggle about, right, is this sense of feeling lonely or alone when they're in a relationship, or not having that space to experience solitude because they're constantly in the presence or under the influence of this other person. So when you talk to couples, a lot of them will tell you, oh, I just wish I just could be by myself. Not that I don't love my partner or I don't respect my marriage, but I just crave to be by myself. And that's why people take off on their own, or people take off with a friend, not necessarily their spouse, because they want and they crave for that quiet time. Right. And I think one of the things that we don't teach ourselves, we don't teach children, we don't talk about in the education system in a big way is how you can learn to appreciate solitude and how important it is for good health, especially mental health, and how you learn to respect another person's solitude, a crave for solitude when you are in an intimate or a very close relationship. So that's something I'd love to talk about, is the place for education and for educators to promote solitude as a tool for wellness in our lives.
So true. It's a very good thing you mentioned relationships, because I think in relationships, just because someone needs or wants solitude doesn't mean they don't love you or they don't want to be without you, but they just need the space to be, isn't it? I think that's something, particularly when you're young, like you said, no one talks about it, no one tells you, so it's difficult to understand, particularly if you land up being with someone who needs that space, and the other person is not understanding, then that itself will create issues in the relationships. So I think it's very important to talk about these things a bit more broadly and the benefits of it as well.
One thing I just wanted to add, Menaca, is that, and then there's this misunderstanding, right? There's misunderstandings like, well, why would you have married someone, or why would you get into a relationship if you want to be alone? Right? So people again confuse that, you are in a relationship, or you are in pursuit of an intimate relationship because you don't want to be alone. Well, no, you get into a relationship hopefully because you want companionship, or you want to share your life with someone. That is very different, fundamentally different from your desire to be free and to be by yourself on your own, where you can experience true solitude. Now, the other thing is that when somebody, let's just say two people are in a relationship, and both don't crave for solitude. Let's say two people are not fiercely independent, they don't crave for solitude, but one person craves more for it than the other and expresses it very honestly and says something on the lines of, oh, by the way, tomorrow is Sunday and I'm going to go for a 2-hour walk in the forest by myself. Now, a lot of times the other individual feels very insulted or hurt, or like, what about me? Or you don't love me enough, that's why you're not inviting me to the walk. Well, it's actually not because they don't love you that they actually said it that way. It's because they love you and they respect that relationship that they chose to be honest about it. Because true relationships, in my humble opinion, true relationships and truly intimate relationships are where you can clearly and honestly express what is it that you need to be yourself and what is it that you need to be happy. So a fiercely independent human being might say, I need, a couple of hours every day to be myself, because that's only how I can write, or I can create music, or I can perform, or I can excel, in the other spheres of life. To be able to communicate that honestly and clearly, you need to care about the other individual and you need to respect the relationship you have, because otherwise you can just carry on lying to yourself and the other person and nobody would notice, right? There's nothing worse than someone asking you to go with them for a walk when truly what they want is to be on their own. Because they might physically be with you on that walk. They might be holding your hand, but they are lost in their mind. They're elsewhere. So you're feeling that you're with somebody, but they're not with you because they're craving for solitude. And so because of the sense of obligation, they're with you. And therefore you don't feel alone. And you think that they don't feel alone, but they are actually in their mind in a different place, craving and going after solitude, which is important for them. So it's actually quite multi-layered, quite interesting, quite intriguing, and quite complex. But because as a society, right, we don't always encourage people, especially at a young age, to start unpacking concepts. And we have a more, sort of a superficial narrative around what it is to be happy, what it is to be alone or not alone. There are very superficial narratives. And then we buy into that narrative, and then we lose the opportunity, or we lose the ability to understand things deeply, not just about world and life in general, but even to understand ourselves deeply and in a more meaningful way. So a lot of people will say, I hate being alone because then I start thinking about myself and all that's wrong with me and my life. Well, unless you know what's not okay about yourself or your life, how do you fix it? How do you get better? How do you grow, right?
And I think people have this fear, isn't it? It's okay not to be okay is the thing. The other thing I want to say is, as a coach as well, even for leadership coach, I always say quality over quantity. It's so much better for people to take that 2 hours or hour or half an hour away and do what they have to do. And because they are energized, they will come back better people. Even in the organizations, people think, oh, they have to be in front of the desk to be more productive. No, let them go when the time is up, or when they want to go half an hour. They are much more energized. They'll be much more productive when they come back and do the work.
Yeah, absolutely, right? If you look at what artists do and what artists what they contribute, to humanity and to the planet, right? Each piece of music, each piece of writing, each piece of art, right? Any product of creativity, right, came almost always from a place of this individual going away deep within themselves and away from people and the world to a place of stillness or solitude or peace. And it's in those quiet moments that they were able to come up with those beautiful creations, right? Imagine a world without artists. Imagine a world without art, without music, right? And products of creativity. Like what
Even
would we
scientists, they
and
need
scientists, exactly. I mean, scientists, absolutely, right? If you think about the hours of deliberation, hours of problem solving. And one of the things I wanted to touch on, Menaca, is problem solving. Because over the years, I have gone from being somewhat of a reactive person to a more reflective person, right? And in earlier years, if there's a problem, right, I had this need to fix it right away, to say something right away, whether it's in my family, personal life, or with friends, or at work, right? It's like, it's got to be done now. This problem's got to be solved now. So because of this urgency to act and do something, what was compromised was the process of understanding what is the problem. Why do we have this problem? And what are all the options before us to solve that problem, right? So while I often thought, oh, I solved a problem, or, I've done something, later on, I've reflected to realize it was a temporary fix, or it was a superficial fix, right? It was not something that lasted for long. Over the years, especially the last couple of years, where I'm trying, and I think I've become more reflective, what I find is my problem solving skills is a little bit more honed. And also I'm less reactive. Though we're all flawed, I'm very flawed, I do still react to people and things, and later on wish that I'd done it differently. Now what happens is, if I'm having a tough week, or if I'm going through a difficult situation, or I'm having a difficulty with an individual, or difficulty understanding why or what an individual is doing, one of the ways I feel I'm most successful in understanding what's going on and understanding why I'm feeling what I'm feeling is by just going into the forest. So I have a forest and a creek near my house, and just about 10, 15 minutes away. I was there yesterday, and it started at the top of the creek and go all the way to the bottom of the creek, walking through the forest, quiet, with no music, nobody with you. And I find that when I start thinking about what's going on, or I start thinking about a person and what's going on, by the time I finish the walk, I absorb and appreciate nature around me. I come back home. I not only have a new perspective about what I was worried about in the first place, I now have, a bit of a wisdom and a bit of a solution to deal with that situation better. And I come back with this burden off my shoulders. So it's a huge problem solving, tool to have in our life's toolkit, the ability to learn, to crave and pursue solitude is definitely something that can enhance the quality of your life. And like you said, quality is always, always better than quantity.
And in personal and professional life, because I think what happens is, when you take a moment back, it helps you being inquisitive, be curious, ask questions. And as they say, powerful questions lead to powerful answers. Because so we often don't take the time to ask those questions. We are so bent upon, like you, when I was young, I was the same. Now and right now, I have to come up with a solution. And I expected the same with my team, or people who I worked with. But hopefully, we have got a bit wiser as we grew older as well.
Hopefully.
That's the hope, right? Thanks, Sobhana. Of course, we have been talking about solitude a lot. So, but of course, rightly so, there's perspective, isn't it? Is the 6 and 9 is the best example. So I'm sure there are people who are listening to us and thinking, yes, it's great, two old people sitting and talking about, and we don't think we are old, but some people might see us. And so what does the research tell us about solitude? Because I think it's a very important piece, because for some people, under certain the scientific evidence or research back up, they don't buy the story.
Yeah, I mean, and the good news is that in the last, a couple of years, especially I would say the last decade, everybody from Harvard University to every single,
Sure.
popular research university has done a ton of research, right? Like I'm sure all of you have read and heard about how monks, MRIs were done on monks, and what their MRI reveals is a very different state of mind compared to somebody who's not practicing meditation or who's not, ability, who doesn't have that ability to pursue solitude. And then even in Western medicine, I mean, though Eastern medicine is always prescribed, done social prescribing, right? Go and immerse yourself in nature, go to the temple, or, go to a place of worship, meditate. These are good for your health. And that's why yoga has become so relevant and popular, in the world today, because people see a benefit to their physical and mental health. And research has studied the benefits of meditative practice, the benefits of yoga, the importance of going into these places of stillness, because it really brings down blood pressure. It deals with all kinds of physical issues that people have. Mental health, people who suffer from, say, depression and anxiety. There's lots of research that basically proves that meditative practice or practices that allow that person to get into a place of stillness, can be very good for them, because it gives clarity, and it gives you the ability to then understand things slightly differently and then solve problems, differently. So there's no dearth of scientific research right now. And in many schools nowadays, especially, alternate schools, that kind of are into global citizenship and all of that, they do have very conscious curriculum, which is all about mindfulness, right? Because unless you teach mindfulness as a subject when children are younger, children and youth don't realize there is something called mindfulness, right? Because we live in a culture of clutter, mental clutter and physical clutter, right? So probably most of us would say that 50 to 75% of what I own, I don't need, right? It's not tied to happiness. It's not tied to peace of mind. We just have stuff, right? And the same way we have stuff, a lot of clutter in our mind, right? And so it takes a lot of discipline, and researchers will say that having a disciplined life where you set aside time to do certain things and set aside time where you do not do certain things. A simple thing like turning off your phone and putting it away, far away from you, right, immediately changes the quality of your life, right? And people who practice it know what I'm talking about. Others might say, no, but I don't check the messages, right? I turned off the ringer. Well, the very fact you have a gadget whose job it is to receive and send messages sitting right beside you is enough to distract your mind. So if you look at sleep research, right, there's enough and more sleep research that says that if you don't tune off from everything and everyone, and you don't shut down your technology, hours before you go to sleep, your mind is still activated and stimulated from what you were doing an hour or two ago, right? So if I was watching TV, I was checking my WhatsApp messages, or I was, listening to, loud music an hour or two before I went to sleep, my brain is still active and stimulated and responding to that stimuli. And that's why people would say, oh my God, I can't just fall asleep. Well, you can't fall asleep because your mind hasn't become still, right? Unless your mind becomes still, you cannot go to sleep. So those of us who sleep like babies, even though we are adults, right, we all have a certain practice that we follow every night. So in my case, like more than an hour before I go to bed, I take a hot shower. I put on only Zenish music, only meditative music, switch off the lights, switch off the phones, and just absorb that beauty of sound around me. And then I feel really calm, I feel really still, I feel really sleepy, and then I touch my bed and I'm just gone. And I don't wake up most days until the alarm rings. And it's such a gift to have the ability to sleep, in your 50s, because insomnia is like a pandemic, right? But I think if more and more people took the time to understand and pursue solitude, a lot of these problems we have across generations, would fade away or go away.
I mean, I was always gifted with the good sleep, but I went through a phase of mental illness, depression. And that's when I actually realized what a gift it is. But like you said, I don't know about the Samsung phones. I'm sure they have something like that. But iPhones, for sure, there is a there is a feature where you can put from this time to this time, and it'll cut off the calls automatically. That's what I have done for myself. Of course, when my parents are ill or something, obviously I didn't switch off, so that I want to know if something is wrong to be in touch. But most of the time, exactly like you, the hot bath, the Zen music, and for people who are curious or inquisitive, you can go and have a look. As you might have heard, Sobhana, about Ho'oponopono, the Hawaiian prayer. So there are loads of different things you can do. Meditation, prayer is, the age-old good thing, whatever you believe in, whatever works for you. But I think it's all about routines again, isn't it? As they say, happiness is a habit, and it's part of it is fitting in a bit of time for solitude as well. And I think knowing the meaning of solitude.
Menaca, the other thing is that one of the realizations I had probably later than I should have had in life is that happiness and emptiness are so interconnected. The more empty you are in your mind, the happier you generally are, right? And the more empty and minimalist our lives are, generally, we are less anxious, less rattled, and we are more happy. And solitude is about emptiness. Unless a glass is empty, you cannot pour water into it and you cannot quench your thirst, right? It's the same with solitude. Like, unless you embrace that state of nothingness, emptiness, which is very difficult for humans, most humans, right? Unless you embrace and understand, you are actually in pursuit of emptiness, which is fundamentally necessary for a state of happiness.
Thanks, Shobhana, because the way I usually explain when I teach or coach or train is, it's like the dishwasher, right? Like, imagine having one cup, one plate, a few things, cutleries and crockeries. Yes, after a while it becomes overloaded. It will start bothering you if you don't put it on the dishwasher and clean it, or the clothes for that matter. It's exactly the same. The mind needs time and space to declutter. Otherwise, you're just putting things on top, and there is one point the mind says, I can't handle it anymore. And then, that's when you sometimes notice people say, they throw a stone, then they throw a brick, and sometimes we wait for the whole wall to collapse for us to notice. But that's what it is, because taking that space to what we are doing in effect, just from a healthcare professional or scientific background, the way I see it is clear all the confusion or the chunk what you are holding on to, so that you can, every day, if you do, the more frequent you do it, the more space you're going to create. I mean, that's how I understand. So that's how I usually tell other people. So thank you so much for that, Shobhana. The other thing I wanted to touch upon is, are there cross-cultural or major philosophical differences when it comes to solitude? Because, of course, we are from different cultures and we see these things very differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think with anything in life, right, we have seen that there's lots of cross-cultural meaning making, right? I call it cross-cultural meaning making because depending on which culture you're part of or which culture you identify you with, because you could be you could be part of a culture, but you may not necessarily identify it. You might identify with another context or a culture, but there are cross-cultural meaning making. So for example, growing up in India, all my life I saw people, especially like, sages or, people who are kind of more religious, spending a lot of time, practicing hymns or listening to hymns or going to temples and just sitting quietly or, making circles around temples or places of worship. So I grew up with that and saw actually the practice of solitude. I just did not understand it or appreciate, it a lot. And in some cultures, being quiet, right, or not doing something is seen as being lazy, right? Or being misunderstood as you're bored, and that's why you're just sitting quietly doing nothing, though you could be actually doing something within your mind, right? So there are cross-cultural meaning makings. The other thing is also about how people perceive people. So for example, in some cultures, let's just say there's a culture that really promotes a very macho kind of masculinity, right? If a man comes along, who is very artistic and is very quiet and, has this ability to go still and is very creative, he may not be, defined as a macho man in that particular context. But in another context, he might be understood as an intellectual. He might be understood as an extraordinary artist, a leader, a problem solver. So there is that cross-cultural, meaning making. And then also within family units, you have that, challenge, right? Where, for example, if you have parents who think differently about solitude, or think differently about, stillness or being quiet and being deliberative and reflective, one parent might push a child, to become more of an extrovert and be busy and active and get involved in sports. And another parent might encourage them to go learn the piano, right? Because they want them to understand at an early age the importance of pursuing something that requires discipline, quiet, and all of that. So there are lots of those cross-cultural, nuances and differences. And then media, social media, movies, all of that contribute, to that meaning making. So yes, there are lots of cross-cultural, but I think in our day and age now, there is cross-cultural pollination happening, right? None of us are really products of just one culture. I mean, that's quite rare, I would say, these days. People are a bundle of so many things and so many backgrounds, right? So, if you take the case of my two sons, Prabinj and Niranj, right? They were born in Canada. They have roots in India. They're right now living in Mexico. And today they are in El Salvador traveling. One day when they kind of come back to so-called home, which is with me in Vancouver, they are products of so many experiences, right? So it'll be very hard for them to say, oh, I feel this way because I'm of Indian heritage, or I'm of Canadian citizenship, or I travel to Mexico. It's a little of all of that. And hopefully cross-cultural experiences, give us a better appreciation for the different ways in which we can understand something and different ways in which we can respect something that means something quite special to a person from a particular background or person who identifies with a particular cultural context.
Thanks, Shobhana. There are so many, the subject is very vast. I have so many other things, but I think we have almost come to the time. It shows how much we enjoy talking about it. I'm just going to ask one more important thing. And then perhaps when we are going to talk to people who are on the Zoom, then maybe we can incorporate these questions a bit more. In your daily life, what role does solitude play and how important it is for you? And is that a skill which anyone can learn? I know I have kind of asked two questions in one question, but it's because of the lack of time.
Yeah. So I'll answer the second part of the question. It's easy, is it a skill that can be learned? Absolutely. And it's a skill that, in my opinion, needs to be taught at the family level, in schools, in colleges, in organizations, because it's so important for wellness and for productivity and lots of other things. In my particular case, I would honestly say that one of the most important things in my life and one of the most important contributors for wellness in my life is solitude. My appreciation for solitude, my daily pursuit of solitude, my appreciation for individuals who crave for solitude and who have helped me understand how important it is to be happy, to be well, to be a good contributor in society. I would say, yeah, solitude is playing an incredibly important part in my life. Yes.
Yes, thank you. I take on it as well. It helps you with personally to be happy, helps you nurture fulfilling relationships and friendships. And it also increases your performance and productivity at work, because as a corporation, everyone is looking at the bottom line or the number, and actually it will turn into dollars and cents as profits if they perform better. And so I think there's absolutely no excuse not to incorporate solitude and mindfulness into the personal or the professional space, isn't it, Shobhana? So, thank you so much. As I know, and as we all have witnessed, you are an excellent speaker. You bring so much of energy, and your knowledge is very vast. So thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have you. Of course, for people who are on Zoom, please hold on. You will get a chance to ask questions from the speaker. I have already started getting questions, and I myself have a few more things to talk about. So we will talk about that. Let me announce the next show next week. It will be episode 87. We will be talking about overcoming grief, because in our community, few people reached out to me and my team asking to talk about this topic. A few of the members there have lost loved ones, very close family members. So that's the reason we decided to bring this topic up. The speaker will be Yuan Gordon. She's a life and empowerment coach, advanced grief recovery specialist, and a mindful practitioner. She aims to empower clients by providing them with a toolkit to teaching confidently face difficult challenges and overcome emotional barriers and limiting beliefs. Grief recovery is part of a toolkit of support mechanisms. So Yuan's main goal is going to be to help people consciously recreate their life after loss. As adults over 40, many of us do go at one point or the other to face grief. It could be parents, it could be spouses, it could be loved ones. So I think it's a very important topic. I'm looking forward to interviewing you on. Now, over to Raj Madhavan to give the word of thanks.
So that's a very powerful presentation by Ms. Sobhana Jaya Madhavan. Today, on behalf of Meet Menaca team, I have the honor and privilege in presenting the word of thanks to Ms. Sobhana. My goodness, the topic is art of learning to appreciate solitude. With all my education I have never ever heard of this word, solitude, until I hear this word in the show today. I had to refer to a dictionary to understand the meaning of it. However, I heard people saying, all of you in the house, leave the house for some time. I want to be alone. I heard that many times. My wife is sleeping, so I can say this. Now I understand very well what it means when people say this. According to Sobhana, being alone at times has lots of benefits. I don't want to list the benefits, as we all heard from Sobhana today. But two aspects struck me very much. Firstly, that being alone at times is also good for stress management and makes you a better person. And secondly, which is very new to me, just because we are alone, that does not mean we should be lonely. These two aspects are very powerful. And also, solitude means you are not lonely, and which really struck me very well. And our next thanks goes to all the viewers signing through Facebook and Zoom to watch the Meet Menaca celebrating talk shows. Many of you are repeated viewers coming on every week, week after week. Without your support, it wouldn't be possible to have successful shows for the past 2 years. Thank you very much for your continuous support. And before I conclude, I want to say something to Ms. Sobhana. It's my pleasure in giving this vote of thanks to a fellow Canadian and a fellow British Columbian. People don't know what is British Columbia mean. It's a province, one of the 9 provinces, and we both live in the same province. I'm coming from Victoria, and Ms. Sobhana, you are from Vancouver, and we are just a ferry ride away. This means we both have to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning to be on the show today. Thank you for doing this for us, Ms. Sobhana. And also, I want to say we both are in the most beautiful and healthy part in Canada. Living here is mesmerizing and therapeutic. Thank you again, Ms. Sobhana.
Thank you so much, Raj. We can't wait to visit both of you in British Columbia now after hearing that. Thank you so much, Sobhana. As ever, you did a fantastic session. It is always a pleasure to host you. For people who are on the Facebook, next time we will meet you same time, same place for the episode 87, Overcoming Grief with Yvonne Gordon. It has come to that time of the day to say goodbye. Until we see you next week, stay safe, be happy, and keep smiling.